fourth class out of the 8 that altogether constitute the number course. Okay, so yes, we'll start by briefly going over what we talked about in the first 3 classes. Okay, so in the first 3 classes, let's start with the first one, the very first one. Okay, sorry. Just give me a second. Where's page number 2? Who stole it? I'm pretty sure that it's just my fault and I'm blaming someone else, but please bear with me. Okay, yeah, as expected. No one stole it, it was just me whining and complaining. Okay, B stole it. Yeah, if anyone, it would be B. If anyone, but nobody did. Okay, but if anyone did, I would also point my finger at B. 안내라, 감사합니다. Okay, yeah, well, speaking of A and B, yeah, well, at the very end of today's class, I will be mentioning A and B, and yeah, let's see later why that is. Okay, poor B. Okay, so anyway, yeah. Today is the 4th class out of the 8 that altogether constitute the number course. Okay, so before we get started, let's briefly just go over what we talked about in the first 3 classes. Okay, so in the first class, yeah, we talked about vocabulary, meaning before you know how to use numbers like 33, well, 2 million, 30,000. Okay, before you start doing that, yeah, you have to know how to say the word number. Okay, because in Korean, depending on the context and, well, depending on perspective, you have 3 versions or 4 versions of the word number. I'm sorry. Okay, so yeah, you have to take a look into the context and see what version of the word number am I going to use. Is it going to be 숫자, 수, or 번호, or the abbreviation 번? Okay, so we briefly talked about that in the first live class. Okay, wait, let's take a look here. Okay, I just checked something technically. I'm sorry about that. I'll have to start over again. I'm sorry about that. Okay, let's just start over. Sorry about the inconvenience. Anyway, so today will be the 4th class out of the 8 that altogether constitute the number course. Okay, so now, wait, let me just check something. I'm sorry. Because they have to go to the YouTube channel. Okay. Yes. So I will really get started. I'm sorry. 죄송합니다. Okay, so today will be the 4th class out of the 8 that altogether constitute the number course. So before we get started, let's briefly go over what we've learned in the first 3 classes. Okay, so in the first class, we talked about vocabulary, meaning before you actually start using real numbers like 17, 45, 3 million, you have to know how to say the word number. Okay, because in Korean, depending on the context, yes, there are 4 or 3 versions. Also, that depends on perspective. Okay, so you have 4 or 3 versions of the word number. So, yeah, depending on the context that you are in, you would either say 숫자 or 수 or 번호 or the abbreviation 번 as the word number. Okay, so you first have to know that. So that's what we talked about in the first class. And in the second class, we mostly spent time talking about the fact that there are 2 formats of numbers in Korean and also when to use which. Okay, so if there are 2 formats of numbers in Korean, native Korean numbers and Sino numbers, of course, that means you have to know when to use which. When do I use native Korean numbers versus when do I use Sino numbers? Okay, so in the second class, we mostly spent time talking about that. And then in the third class, yeah, we took all of that and mostly spent time actually building sentences as examples to get more used to it. Okay, so today in the fourth class, yes, we will also be doing mostly what we did in the third class, which is, yeah, to take everything that we've learned and actually apply them and try to build sentences as examples. Okay, it's just that we will be trying to use bigger numbers. Okay, so compared to the third class. Okay, so now let's actually start the fourth class then. Okay, are we ready to go? If we are, yes, let's kick off the fourth class out of the 8 that altogether constitute the number course. Okay, are we ready? Then 계속할까요? Should we continue? Okay. So, now, let's say I am with a 친구, a friend. And we have to do something together. Now, the question is, when are we going to start? So I'm going to look at my watch and say, let's start exactly at 45 and then 분, a unit that is used for time, specifically minutes, 45 minutes. Okay, so yeah, this is how you would say it in Korean. Okay, so we're gonna say, let's start exactly at 45 minutes. Okay, so I am not saying let's do it for 45 minutes. No, I'm just looking at the clock and let's say it's 2:13 right now, or let's say 2:30. Okay, so if someone says within this type of a context, let's start exactly at 45 minutes, yeah, they're talking about 2:45. They are not saying let's do it for 45 minutes. Let's do it at 2:45. Of course, the 2 part is omitted because it's too obvious. Of course, I'm looking at my watch, it's 2:30, so if I just say 45, of course, I'm talking about 2:45. Because if I was talking about 3:45, I would have said 3. Okay, so then how are we going to build this sentence? Using numbers. Okay, so let's start. Now, yes, I do always say the best way to place let's with a verb is to not place it at all, right? Of course, there are a lot of ways you can do it, but once again, you have to be very careful. In Korean, the keyword that you always have to keep in mind is version. Well, also, in the same vein, you always have to ask yourself, what kind of Korean am I speaking? Because whatever you are using, a vocabulary, a word, a grammar form, whatever, yeah, usually it only works in one format of Korean and it stops working in other formats. Okay, so yeah, in just normal spoken Korean, the best way to say let's with a verb is to not do it at all. Let the context do it. Okay, so I'm just gonna say start. And of course, because we are both going to do it together, of course, the let's will be too obvious according to the situation. I'm not just telling you, hey, you start exactly at 2:45. No, we're going to do it together. So if I say start exactly at 45, the let's is already implied. Okay, and we have the adverb exactly and time at 45 minutes. Okay, so we have a number. So when you have a number, yes, the first thing that you have to do is don't think about the number. How do I say 45 in Korean? Of course, no. That is not the first question that you should ask yourself. The first question that you should ask yourself is, yeah, which format of numbers am I going to use? Am I going to use Sino or native? In this case, yes, Sino, right? Why is that? Because of course, there are exceptions variables that you always have to keep in mind, but for the most part, yes, when you are using numbers for things or situations that are not counted by saying how many, in other words, when you are not counting so therefore you are not counting, what you are doing is quantifying or labeling using numbers. If that's the case, you use Sino numbers. Okay, so once again, yes, I always say, look at the unit. Right now, minute. And ask yourself, what is this unit for? It's for time, right? Okay, so then ask yourself, is time something that I count by saying how many? Do you say, how many time do we have left? Do you say that? How many time do we need? 50 minutes? 2 hours? Do you say how many time? Exactly. No. No. Okay, so that's why we are using numbers for something that we don't count by saying how many. Therefore, we are quantifying. Time is something that you quantify. Okay, so yeah, at 45. So therefore, that tells me that I need the number 45, but in the format of Sino numbers. Okay, so let's try to build the number 45 in the format of Sino numbers. Okay, so when you're building a number in Sino numbers, yeah, do this. First, look at the biggest unit on this list here. So within 45, what is the biggest unit that comes from this list? 100? No. A 10 is the biggest unit. So yeah, I'm just going to ask myself, then how many 10s do I need? I need 4 of them. So I'm going to say 4 10s. 40. So 40. 40. 40. And then if I do that, what's left? Well, yeah, a 5 is left. Okay, now just place 5. 45. 45. 45. 45, but within the format of Sino numbers. Okay, so yeah, keep this in mind. 45, and then 분, 45 minutes. Okay, so now, of course, there are a lot of ways of saying exactly. Now, and yes, the adverb exactly can be very usefully used when you are using numbers, right? Exactly 38, exactly 523. Okay, so yeah, an adverb, a version of exactly that can do that would be 딱, 딱, 딱 45분. Okay, so now this is a version of exactly. Once again, yes, of course, it's not the only way of saying exactly, but it is colloquial. It is something that can be used in conversational Korean. It is not too poetic. Okay, so very convenient, right? 딱, 딱 45분. Okay, so I'm going to say 딱 exactly 45분. And then, yeah, I'm going to place at. When at modifies some kind of a time word, yeah, 딱 45분에, and then 시작하다, start. Of course, I don't want a display form. I don't want 다. I want its actual form in present tense. So I'm going to inflect it. In other words, conjugate it. 시작해요. Okay, so I'm going to tell my friend, hey, let's start. So it's 2:30 right now. Let's start exactly at 2:45. Then you're going to say it like this. Let's start exactly at 45 minutes. 딱 45분에 시작해요. 딱 45분에 시작해요. 딱 45분에 시작해요. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 계속할까요? Okay. Now, I'm going to go off topic just a little bit. Speaking of 딱, okay, but maybe depending on perspective, you could say I am not so much going off topic because of the fact that 딱 is a version of exactly. It will be used very often when you have some kind of a number in the sentence or the context. Okay, so, well then, yeah, having a better understanding on 딱, well, in some sense, helps you use numbers better. Okay, so 딱 is a version of exactly. And that's why I said it's very often used when you are using some kind of a number. However, yes, is 딱, a version of exactly, only going to be used when you are using numbers? That's not the case either. Now, sometimes you might hear people say something like this. 딱, and then 좋다. So I'm taking the adjective good, but I don't want its display form. I want its actual form present tense. So 좋아요. Okay, so sometimes people can say this. Oh, 딱 좋아요. 딱 좋아요. So they are saying, oh, it's exactly good. Okay, so the sentiment could be very different compared to English, right? When they are saying, oh, 딱 좋아요. They're saying it's good because it's exactly the way I want it to be. Okay, so for example, let's say I wanted the markers to be organized like this. I wanted yellow to be here, purple to be here, pink to be here, blue to be here, and whatever, green to be here. Okay, so if someone says, okay, I placed all the markers as you asked, and I'm going to take a look at it and I can say, oh, things are exactly the way I want them to be. So, 딱 좋아요. It's exactly good. Okay? So, yeah, you can use 딱, a version of exactly, very usefully. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Should we move on? Okay. So, once again, let's try to use a number. Now, this time, I am once again with a 친구. Now, let's say I am in some kind of a 영상, a video, on YouTube or whatever. Let's say I am in some kind of a 영상 in which I think I humiliated myself in. I think that, yeah, inside this video, yeah, you can see me, I, humiliating myself. Okay, so I don't like this video, but let's say it's not my video, so I can't take it down either. Okay, so let's say I'm a little bit frustrated. So my friend comes along and says, hey, it's not a big deal. Come on. Yeah, it's not a big deal. So let's say I'm going to say, it is a big deal because guess what? Let's say 2 million people watched it. Let's say there are 2 million views. Okay, so this video got 2 million views. Of course, just because it got 2 million views doesn't necessarily mean that exactly 2 million people watched it, but still, let's just say. Okay, so now we need the number 2 million then. So, once again, yes, there are native Korean numbers and Sino numbers, but there is something that you do have to keep in mind, right? Which is the fact that native Korean numbers are usually only used up to 99. Okay, so starting from 100, you only use Sino numbers. That's why when it comes to crazy big numbers, yeah, you only see them in Sino numbers. Okay, so 2 million is a huge number. So let's talk about something that we do have to keep in mind when you're using big numbers. So if you take a look at this list here on page number 4, now you could notice that the system in which numbers get bigger and bigger, yeah, it's very different compared to that in English, for example, right? A good example would be 만. In English, you could say 10,000, right? But in Korean, no. Saying 10,000, yeah, that's an expression that doesn't even exist. Okay, so 10,000 is 1만. Okay, so you cannot say 10,000. For example, like 10,000. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever because 10,000, 10,000 is 1만. Okay, so it's very similar to saying this. Now, in English, do you say 10 hundreds? Not really, right? No. You don't say 10 hundreds because 10 hundreds is 1,000, 1,000. So it's a very similar concept. It's exactly the same concept. So you can't say 10,000 in Korean because 10,000 is 1만. Okay, so as you can see, as numbers get bigger and bigger, that's why the system in which numbers get bigger and bigger is very different. Okay, so yeah, my little advice would be don't always try to do the math at first. So for example, like what's 10,000 times 100 or something like that? Just have a couple of important milestones memorized so that they can work as standard. Okay, so standards. For example, let's say, yeah, 만 is 10,000. Now, 100만, 100만 is a million. Okay, so once again, yes, 10,000 is 1만. Okay, so then what is 10,000 times 100? Well, a million. A million, therefore, is not a million, it's 100만, 100만. So I took 100 and I attached it to 만, 100만. Okay, so yeah, have a couple of important milestones memorized. Yeah, so that you have a standard, a starting point when you have to build crazy big numbers. For example, your thought process could look like this. Okay, I don't have everything memorized here, but I do know that, a million would be 100만. Okay, so then what's, 10 million. So a million is 100만, 100만. So 10 million must be, well, 1000만, 1000만. Okay, so have a couple of important milestones memorized. Okay, so once again, tell yourself a million is 100만, 100만. So a million times 10, 10 million must be then 1000만. Okay, because a million was 100만, 100만. So 10 million, 1000만, 1000만. Okay, so does that make sense? If it does, 계속할까요? Should we continue? Okay, now, someone could say, will I end up in a lot of situations where I have to use these big, huge numbers? Don't you just usually say maybe up to 15 usually? So is this really priority? It looks a little bit annoying because it's so different, for example, compared to English. Now, I would say, it kind of is important because, for example, now, if you are gonna come to Korea for a trip, whatever. Now, I'm pretty sure that you will spend some money. Okay, so when you're talking about money, you would very often say something like 7만 won. Dollars in English. I'm sorry, in America, for example. The United States. Won in Korea. Okay, so you will have to say something like 10만 won or 100만 won or man won or whatever. Okay, so if you're gonna come and you're not gonna spend a penny, well then I could say, maybe it's not too important, but I don't think that's really possible, right? Okay, so even though, yes, it is very different, therefore it could be a little bit annoying at first, yes, you do have to study it. Okay, so now, then I know what a million is. Because 10,000 is 1만 in Korean. 10,000 times 100 is a million. So it must be 100만, 100만. Okay, so what did we talk about just a little while ago? When you're building up big numbers in Sino numbers, first take a look at the number that you need and then take a look at this list here. And ask yourself, what is the biggest unit that the number I need has on this list? It's not, it's a million, it's 2 million. So we're trying to come up with 2 million. Okay, so we don't have 10 million. No, the number that I need does not have 10 million in it. The biggest unit here on this list in the number that I need right now is a million. Okay, so just first place a million and then ask yourself, how many of these do I need? I need 2 of them. So I'm going to say 2 100만 because 100만 is a million. How many millions do I need? I just need 2 of them. So 200만. Okay, sorry. 200만. 200만. Okay. So now we have the number 200만. 2 million. Okay, so basically saying 200 mans. Okay, so once again, if I were to remind you of the context is, there's a video in which I think I humiliated myself. And of course I don't like that. Now, this video goes viral and therefore a lot of people will see me humiliating myself. So I'm frustrated, but my 친구 friend comes along and says, hey, what's the big deal? And I'm gonna say, well, I'll tell you what the big deal is. 200만 people, 2 million people watched it. Okay, so yes, now we're talking about people. Yes, which means we are using numbers when counting, when we are talking about something that can be counted by saying how many, because people, can be counted by saying how many, right? How many people do we need? How many people know this? Okay, so that means that we are counting, which means we need native Korean numbers usually, but because this number is over 100, yes, that's why we're using Sino numbers. Okay, anyway, because we are counting, when you are counting something in Korean, you always need some kind of a counting unit. That's why in Korean, knowing how to say two and knowing how to say book is not enough to say two books. You need some kind of a counting unit. You're going to say 책 두 권. 책 두 권. Okay, so you're basically saying two kwons of books. Okay, so yeah, now if books have their own unique unit for counting unit, then of course people have it too. Okay, so the unique counting unit for people is 명. Okay, so yeah, when you're counting people, 2 million people, you cannot say that. Knowing how to say 2 million and people is not enough to say 2 million people. You need the counting unit. So I'm going to say 200만 명. So yeah, 2 million 명s of people. And then 보다, watch, saw, see this video. Okay, but I don't want its display form. I want its actual form in past tense. So 봤어요. Okay, 200만 명 왔어요. Okay, so now I'm not gonna actually say people, right? I'm saying 2 million 명s of people, but I don't have to say people now, right? Because first of all, the context is making it kind of obvious, but even if the context and situation is not making it obvious, yeah, this unit, counting unit makes it super obvious because, yeah, once again, 명 is a unique counting unit for people. Okay, so of course, if I'm using 명, of course, I'm talking about people. Okay, so 200만 명 왔어요. However, yes, I am going to use a subject particle here. Now, when you have some kind of a number and some kind of a counting or quantifying or labeling unit, and you also want to use a particle for whatever reason, do not attach it to the number, attach it to the unit. Okay, so yes. And also keep in mind, yes, when you have some kind of a number and some kind of a unit, do not separate them when it comes to part of speech. So if the number is the subject, then the unit is also the subject. Okay, and we have the verb. Now, because I have the subject, 2 million 명s of people, right now, I'm going to give it a subject particle. Why? Am I giving it a subject particle just because it is a subject? No, those are the rules of poetic Korean. That's one of the biggest reasons why poetic Korean is so much easier to learn and teach. And that's why poetic Korean is picked by a curriculum when it has to teach Korean. Okay, so that's why the slogan here is to escape poetic Korean, right? Okay, so of course, I am going to make sure that I don't use subject and object particles. Unless I have a reason. Okay, so right now, I'm going to use it for two reasons. Number 2 and 4. Okay, multiple reasons can be applying at the same time, right? Number 1, yeah, because I want to imbue the nuance of frustration. I said I'm frustrated. If there's a video in which I humiliated myself and 2 million people saw it, of course I don't like that, so I'm frustrated. So I'm going to use the subject particle to imbue the nuance of frustration. I don't like this. I want this video to be taken down, but it's not my video. So I can't. So I'm frustrated. 200만 명이 왔어요. And also, I am going to use it for reason number 4. Yes, when? Yeah, subject or object, what does this mean? Well, yeah, it means when the structure of the sentence alone does not make it clear whether a word is a subject or object. Therefore, there might be room for misunderstandings, or your sentence just might sound outrageous or silly. Okay, so I'll give you an example. Okay, so let's say a friend of mine says, well, let's say I am in middle school, whatever. Now, let's say I had like a guitar. Now, let's say I was being too loud with it all night. So let's just say my parents threw it away. So my friend comes to me and says, oh, you seem to be in a bad mood. And I'm going to say, well, and my friend says, is it because of your guitar? And I'm going to say, yeah. My parents, 부모님, threw it away. Of course, I'm talking about the guitar. It's too obvious. Therefore, I'm going to omit it and say threw away, right? 버렸어요. Of course, 버리다. I inflected it, conjugated it into its actual form, past tense. 버렸어요. Now, take a look here. 부모님 버렸어요. My parents threw away it. Threw it away. Now, technically, there's nothing wrong with this sentence. However, there is room for misinterpretation, right? Because it could sound like I'm saying, I, the invisible subject, threw away my parents, the object. It might be that I was too obvious, therefore it was omitted. That's why you don't see it. So it might be that the invisible subject I threw away the object my parents. Now, this sounds outrageous or even silly, right? So I want to make it clear that, oh no, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying my parents, the subject, threw away it, the object, the invisible object, in this case, guitar. Okay, so if you feel like the structure of the sentence alone is not making it very clear whether a word is a subject or object, and therefore you feel like this might be misinterpreted, or my sentence sounds outrageous or silly, then yeah, you can try to make it extra clear that I am not using parents as an object, because if I do, now it sounds like I'm saying I threw away my parents. No, I'm using it as the subject. So I'm going out of my way to make it extra clear. So if I want to make it extra clear that 부모님, parents, is the subject, not the object, then the best way of doing it is to give it a subject particle. Okay, so 부모님이 버렸어요. So you could also ask a question. Now, will the listener also know that that's why I used a subject particle? Yes, Koreans would know. Because, yeah, Koreans, of course, because it's their first language, they are already subconsciously but immediately thinking, processing why this subject and object particle was placed. They are subconsciously and immediately doing it. So, because in their minds, of course, they know that, of course, subject and object particles should not appear unless you have a specific reason. So if you say 부모님이 버렸어요, they're automatically computing the situation immediately, and they will come to the conclusion very quick that, oh, yeah, I guess it's here because if it's not there, it sounds silly or outrageous. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 계속할까요? Okay. So now that reason number 4, is applying right now, because imagine that there is no subject particle here. Then it could sound like I'm saying, I saw 2 million people. I saw 2 million people. Okay, now once again, you could say, well, isn't it kind of obvious according to the context and situation and common sense? Yeah, we were talking about a video, so aren't we obviously talking about views and people who watched it? Yeah, I would say yes. So right now, more so than number 4, I am more focused on reason number 2. I'm just saying, technically number 4 could apply. So in this case, reason number 4 is not that important, but the previous example that I showed you is important, right? Because although, according to common sense, context, and situation, people know that I am of course not saying I threw away my parents, but still, we can't as people help but think that it does sound silly. Okay, so anyway, so now we have the whole 문장 200만 명이 봤어요. So once again, I don't like this video because I'm in it humiliating myself, and my friend comes along and says, what's the big deal? And I'm gonna say, well, I'll tell you what the big deal is. 200만 명이 봤어요. 2 million millions of people watched it, saw it. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 넘어갈까요? Okay, so one more time, keep in mind, yes, people can be counted by saying how many. Yeah, of course. How many people came? Well, 17 people. How many people do you need on your team? I need 8. Okay, of course. So once again, of course, yeah, I should be using native Korean numbers, but there was another thing that you have to keep in mind, right? Yeah, native Korean numbers are usually only used up to 99. That's why even though you are counting, because the number is 2 million, which is way over 99, yes, that's why we're using Sino numbers. So that's something very important that you do have to keep in mind. Okay. So let's take a look at another example. Okay, so this time, let's say I am going from Korea to let's say France. Okay, so it's gonna be a long flight, right? So yeah, now let's say I get to an airport in France, okay, and I'm supposed to meet a friend there. Okay, so the friend says, yeah, what did you do to kill time during the flight? And I'm going to say, well, I watched 3 and then movies. I watched 3 movies. Okay, so let's try to do this. Now, movies. Is movies something that you can count by saying how many? Can you say how many movies did you watch? Can you say that? Is it possible or is it impossible? Exactly, yeah. Yes. Movies can be counted by saying how many. Okay, so, and the number is 3. It doesn't go over 99. So, yeah, we're going to use native Korean numbers. Okay, so now, then once again, just like anything else, knowing how to say 3 and movie is not enough to say 3 movies, of course. So let's go to page number 8. Okay, so the counting unit that movies use, yeah, is 편. Okay, so I'm going to say, for example, 영화 something 편. So if it's 4, I'm going to say 영화 4편. So I'm not saying 4 movies, I'm saying 4 편s of movies. Okay. So then let's try to say that. Of course, no I, and the verb watched. Okay, we already know how to say watched, right? We just used it in the previous example. And 3 movies, 3 편s of movies. Okay, so yeah, let's first place movie, 영화, and then 세, because I need the number 3 in native Korean numbers because, yeah, I'm using the unit 편. What is the unit 편 for? Yeah, for movies. Is movies something that I can count by saying how many? Once again, yes. That's why I'm going to use native Korean numbers. That's why I need 3 in native Korean numbers. 세. But you do have to remember this, right? Something that we talked about in the second class. Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4 have a separate format in red. 하나, 둘, 셋, 넷. Okay, so yes, usually, of course, there are rare exceptions, but usually the red ones, yeah, it says here, right? A separate format of numbers that are used when simply saying numbers without any kind of a counting or quantifying unit. Okay, so once again, yeah, usually when you're just saying the number for the sake of saying the number. You're not using a number to count or quantify or label. So for example, yeah, what's an example that I sometimes use? Let's say, yeah, I am making a movie. I need someone to play a character that gets very, very angry. So when this actor is auditioning for this role, yeah, I need to know what you sound like when you're super angry. So I just ask this actor, yeah, can you please like yell for me? Just say anything. Yeah, you don't have to say, yeah, just say 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, it doesn't matter what you say. I just want to hear your voice when you're super angry. Okay, so in that case, yeah, when we're saying if he actually yells 1, 2, 3, 4, we're not counting anything, we're not quantifying anything, we're not labeling anything. We're just saying the numbers for the sake of saying numbers. Okay, so in that case, you would use 하나, 둘, 셋, 넷. But once again, right now, I am using numbers to count. So I'm not going to use 셋, I'm going to use 세. Okay? So 영화 세 편. So 3 편s of movies. 영화 세 편. 영화 세 편. And then, yeah, we know how to say watched, right? 보다, but I don't want its display form. I want its actual form in past tense. 보았어요. Okay, so 영화 세 편 보았어요. 영화 세 편 보았어요. 영화 세 편 보았어요. So I watched 3 편s of movies. Okay, does that make sense? If it does, 계속할까요? Should we continue? Okay, okay. Okay. So, now, let's talk about something that we already did, but it's very important, so I'll explain again. So, now, let's say the flight was, let's just say about 7 hours. Okay, well, let's say 6 hours. So, at first, I didn't know that I could watch, well, I wasn't sure if I could watch 3 pyons of movies within 6 hours. Okay, so now I thought that, yeah, each movie would be like 2 hours and 15 minutes long, so I thought that maybe it's not enough for 3. But for whatever reason, it was enough. Okay, so I guess I watched relatively short movies. Okay, so now if I'm going to imbue the nuance that I am looking at 3 as a big number because I thought that I could only watch 2 movies. Well, then how would I do that? How would you imbue that nuance into the sentence? Okay, so how would you do that? Let's just imbue nuance. Let's not actually say that I am looking at 3 as a big number because I was expecting 2. Exactly. Okay, exactly, yes. Exactly. Now, yeah, we're going to use the ina or na particle, right? Because they are particles, they will be attached to something. If whatever that is ends with a consonant ina, a vowel na. Okay, and once again, when you have some kind of a number and also a unit and you want to use a particle, don't give it to the number, give it to the unit. Okay, so yes, I'm going to push 보았어요 to the right just a little bit and attach ina because 편 ends with the N consonant. Exactly. I can say, hey, can you believe this? I only had 6 hours and I watched 3 pyons of movies. Isn't that a big number? Because I was expecting 2. Okay, so 영화 3편이나 봤어요. Okay, 영화 3편이나 봤어요. 영화 3편이나 봤어요. Okay, so yeah, because this ina, these particles, yeah, there are in large 3 things, typically 3 things that they can do. And one of the things that they can do is to indicate that the speaker is viewing a number as a big number, right? Now, yeah, this is very useful because I would say no number is absolutely big or absolutely small either. It always depends on the context. For example, if 70 people came, is that absolutely a big number? No, because if I was expecting 500 and 70 showed up, it's a small number. But let's say I only prepared for 13 people and 70 showed up. Now it's a big number. Okay, so yeah, having something that can automatically let the listener know that I am viewing this number as a big number or a small number, well, yeah, having something that you can use to automatically indicate that, yeah, is very useful. Okay, 영화 3편이나 봤어요. Okay. So, now, that was it for the fourth class. What we will do in the fifth class is, yeah, we're going to keep doing what we are doing right now. We're going to try to use a lot of numbers in a lot of sentences with a lot of units. Now, however, what's going to be different tomorrow in the fifth class is, yes, when we do talk about when to use native and sino numbers, yeah, the overall rule, the overall structure, system, we know that, right? But once again, at the bottom of page number 5, there are exceptions. So, yeah, for example, yeah, time. You could say, well, didn't you say if you're using numbers for things or situations that are not counted by saying how many, you use sino numbers? Well, then time should always be sino numbers, right? Because you don't say how many time do we have left. Okay, yeah, well, that's why it's called exceptions, right? Yeah, usually most units for time, minute, second, year, month, week, day, yeah, are sino numbers, as they should. But there's one exception here, right? Hour. Okay, so that's why if someone says, well, your record is officially 2 hours, 2 minutes, and 2 seconds. So only minute and second will be E, 2 in sino numbers, and hour will be 2 in native Korean numbers. Okay, so yeah, tomorrow in the fifth class, we will keep on doing what we do, use a whole bunch of numbers, use a lot of numbers in a lot of sentences, but we will spend a little bit of more time with the exceptions so that they don't throw you off when you are in a real situation.